Hey everybody, this is Noah back for episode 25, I believe, which is a quarter of the way to 100. Hopefully we'll get there one day. But it's episode 25 today of my series of thought bubbles where I get to talk about whatever's on my mind recently. Life update. I've been trying to get back into cooking. Um I spent a lot of time, especially in college. For anybody who's also in college, housing prices are like really, really high. So you got to save your money wherever you can. You know what I mean? Like you got to spend wisely. So instead of taking out, I spent a lot of time like cooking meals basically in college. So yeah, I did that. And then when I came back home, I kind of stopped. I think a lot of it was just kind of like me being lazy, like when your parents cook you meals or like when you can just like go out and drive and grab some whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like makes things very convenient. So yeah, I stopped cooking for a while, but now I'm trying to get back into it. I found a really good like meal prep cookbook that I think is pretty interesting. So I'm planning to just use that, and especially for me because I think I want to be a bit more like intentional with like health stuff this year. So definitely want to do that, eat a bit healthier, and then I think also like high like blood pressure runs in my family, so trying to keep that down because to live a long and happy life, you have to live a long life first and then be happy. So yeah, working on that. Anyway, to the topic of today is kind of I wanted to talk about like where we get our validation from. Um, I think a lot of times, for me at least in my experience, like why I kind of like want to think about it a little bit more is because like I think for the longest time I think in my life that like my validation came from like external people or like external sources. So like how I felt about how I was doing or like how I was feeling on the day was kind of predicated on like my friends or like other people that I meet. So like for example, like let's say it's more prevalent I think in like the case where let's just say like I have like a friend that's like upset or I notice that like they haven't been texting me for like a while or like haven't responded. Like I think for me, I think because so much of like my value center was on other people and what they needed that I ended up a lot of times kind of like either trying to be like I end up kind of like being annoying in a way, like um I'm like always like trying to ask like, hey, like this person, are you doing okay? Did I do something wrong? Like whatever it might be, and I spent so much time like being like that. And I think also like one is kind of like annoying, like it's just like you're kind of just overthinking things in your own head and you're kind of just like, well, because so much of like my value center and my like basically you get the point, right? Like you spend so much time like worrying and wanting validation from other people, and like when they don't give you that, you kind of like imagine things that are going wrong for you. So a lot of it too I think connects to kind of self-deprecating tendencies of like whenever in that case, right, where someone's not responding to me or I notice someone's like not really like feeling well mentally or like you kind of get the signs of like they're like something's going on, it's almost like a reflex to always be like, hey, is everything okay? Because I think because I got so much of my validation from external sources or places like around me that like I was always worried all the time, like, am I doing okay? Like, if this person hasn't said like like thanks for doing whatever like in a long time or like whatever like hasn't like answered my text or whatever it might be, right? Like I spent a lot of time worrying about getting validation from like other people, and what it kind of leads to is kind of what I mentioned where like a lot of the time you're just like because you're so worried about getting that validation that like when the tiniest thing goes wrong, right, whether it's like let's just say maybe they just haven't answered you in like a day. I think I had this talk with my friends where like a lot of the times you're kind of just overthinking it. Like a lot of times when there's no answer in our group chat, when someone's like, hey, do you want to play some games today? And there's no answer, like a lot of times it's just because we're busy. Like we're all like working adults. We're all like have things to do. Everyone's not going to be busy at every day, at every like beck and call, like that's just not how life is and how like people work. And so I think expecting people to always like be there. It's just not realistic. And so what ends up happening is like for a while, I think when I would put stuff in the chat and no one would answer me, or we've had like friends like who did this, and I think I'm better at it in this case now than like compared to previous times. But like I was so worried, like, hey, did I like do something wrong? Like, is that why they don't want to answer me? And like you kind of like like spiral and like go into like there's a lot of just like dark thinking or like negative thinking because it's always like it's never like oh they just might be busy, you know, that's just like the reality of things. You kind of just like get caught up in the caught up in the moment and you're just like what's wrong with me, you know, like what can I, and then like a lot of it is like okay what can I fix, even though it's like literally the smallest thing and there's literally nothing wrong with you, and that like it's just how life is, and like you can't control what other people do, you know, like I can't like control if people are free to play video games with me, you know, like that's just the thing. And so I think it goes back to something else that I've been learning about recently, which has been like attachment styles, because like I took like a quiz and I'm an anxious attachment style, which kind of makes sense if you've been listening to most of the things I say. Generally, like TLDR of it is just like based on my past and kind of like events that have happened before, like a lot of time basically I'm like generally anxious to things. So when things go wrong, I'm like worried, like, or like if someone doesn't answer me, then I get worried, you know, like stuff like that. Like if someone goes quiet, like etc etc, you know, like it's just generally like I'm anxious and like always worried, and a lot of the times the blame falls on me, not just like because I what's it called, it's kind of like yeah, like basically like I'm just like worried that something is gonna go wrong all the time, and that like whenever something does go wrong that it's on like it's like my ownness. So anyway, enough of that. But like I think a lot of the reason why I'm so like nervous or like get so worried about that stuff partly is attachment style, but partly I think it's also because like I get a lot of validation from what other people think. And I think that also leads into the part where like I've been a people pleaser for a long time because like you know my validation comes from like my friends and like whatever, like who I hang out with. And so when all of that, all of your values are placed on something external, one, I think it leads to a lot of times you getting like really anxious and nervous about like what does this person think, you know, did I do something wrong, is it always my fault, you know, like that kind of thinking. But also it's like it's so like unstable because like your mental state, your like happiness is based upon someone else's actions that you have no control over, but you feel the responsibility for. And so I think it's like really rocky ground where like one week you could be really happy because your friends are giving you a lot of validation, and the next you're kind of just like dang, like empty, you know. And so I'm still working on trying to like I think it's always been a work in progress for sure, but like I think um instead of being in my case like having all of your validation come from external sources, I feel like it should just become come from within. And so part of it I think is just listening to your own intuition. I think a lot of the times when I'm doing things or like looking to do things, a lot of times I like shoot down ideas because like I'm kind of just like, wow, that's stupid, or like, why did I think of that, or like this will never work. But I think a lot of the time that's because like I'm so worried about what other people are gonna think, what that external validation is gonna come from, that like I just shoot the idea down. And so what I'm trying to do and what I think might help other people who are kind of like this, where your values are so centered on external like people or things or values or whatever, like when your validation is coming externally, like one of the things that I think could help you is like just listening to your intuition and not being like so quick to just like shoot things down. You know, like when you come up with an idea, let's just say like go out to like a cafe by yourself. You're gonna not like, even though it's like it might be hard the first couple of times, I think, to just be like get over that hump of, you know, wow, that's a stupid idea, why would I do that, you know, it's just going alone, like what, you know, like instead of doing that, like be a bit more like positive, nice about it to yourself. You know, I think it relates back to something I talked about in the last video of like would if your younger self, like imagine like young you, like 8-year old you, and he or she or they or whatever it might be, like came up with like a idea, right? Let's just say in this case it's like going to grab a meal by yourself. Would you tell that version of you that like he's stupid for thinking it because like, you know, you're eating alone, you know, like that's kind of insane. And so if you think about it that way, then it becomes a lot easier to be like, okay, maybe I should just go and try it and listen to my intuition because it's something that you want to do because it brings you happiness. You know what I mean? Like even like for something like a sport, like in my case it's like bowling. Like I do bowling because I enjoy the sport and it brings me like happiness. Like the validation comes from me because it's something I want to do. And it doesn't come from like, oh, are other people going to think it's cool, because like if I wanted to play a sport that seemed cool, like I would play golf, like golf is a big sport, especially among engineers. Those who know, um, a lot of engineers like golf. I don't know why. Maybe it's just to like flex their wallets. A whole nother conversation for another day. I never get it. Anyway, I don't enjoy golf. That's like the bottom line for me. And so I feel like if I was still kind of, or I still am, but like if I was going to look and search for external validation, what I would do is I would just say F it and just go golfing. I'd go golfing with like all the people in my office, whatever, like, and not worry about whether I'm having a good time because it's like, you're hanging out with friends. But I think on the other side of it, it's like you just feel unfulfilled at the end of the day. Like you're just like searching for validation from a source that like may or may not give it to you, and then if they don't give it to you, you're just like worried like you did something wrong, even though you didn't and you have no control over it. So instead, what I've been trying to do is just like, I don't really want to golf. What do I want to do? I want to go bowling, and like on weekends I'll go even by myself. I don't have to go with friends. Like just going bowling to practice, to get better, like all of that stuff. And it brings me an infinitely higher amount of joy than I think I would experience if I had gone like golfing and like just been like whatever, like I'm just looking for validation from other people, like instead, because it's like an internally like validated thing, that like my validation comes from myself, that I'm able to enjoy bowling, I think, as much as I do. And I think that applies to like a bunch of other areas in my life, but like I think the main point is that like it's so much more stable, I think, when your validation comes from yourself and comes from within, comparatively to when it comes from external. And then I think also at the same time it leads me to be a lot less like pessimistic about things, because like I know for sure that like this is something that I want and that brings me happiness and brings me joy, rather than, oh, it's something that brings someone else joy. Like it kind of doesn't make sense if you think about it that way. But yeah, generally, I think the biggest takeaways or points that I wanted to talk about was just that, like, if you center like, if all of your validation in your life comes from external sources, whether it's like in the form of some sort of digital likes or clicks, or like if it comes from your friends, or if it comes from literally any other source other than yourself, like, and that's your center of what brings you happiness, it's such an unstable place to be, because you base like all of your value and self-worth and happiness on people and things you cannot control. Because like I can't control whether someone I like texts me back. I can't control if like, you know, like I can't control basically anything else other than myself, which is why I think it's so much better if your center of values is centered on yourself and you get that validation internally, like I think giving yourself gas and like being like hyping yourself up, like doing things that make you happy because you like to do it, not because someone else likes to do it, like it's such like I don't know, it's like just like a good feeling. I think that's why I think like bowling for me is like, it's like the happiness I get from bowling is like something I don't experience like from a lot of other things, where like I remember being like doing things because other people want to do it, and like, I think it's important to make concessions here and there, but it's also at the same time like you gotta find it within yourself, like find what makes you happy and then chase that for sure. And that like all your validate, like a majority, I think, of your validation should come from yourself, because it leaves, or like it helps you lead a more, I think, stable and happy life for sure. But I think that's pretty much it for today. If you like the video, like it, subscribe, do whatever. Let me know in the comments if you're also having a lot of, I don't think I'm having a lot of issues, but it's definitely something I'm talking about for sure, of hence why it's on this channel. But let me know what you think about my thoughts about external and internal validation. If you would like to see any other videos, I'm gonna slide over here. Up here's a playlist of all the videos that I've made so far, and here's the little subscriber button if you want to click it and enjoy it. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.